We can go ahead and start with our presentation. I'll introduce you to Isabelle Allen from Wakatone, and she can get into more detail about what she's here for today.
Awesome. Thanks, Isabelle and Nelson, for the intro and for asking me to speak in this series. I enjoyed Gordon's presentation. I believe it was a whole month ago already, and hopefully I can build on that. Today I'll be talking about boots on the ground and HAP field work that's happened in the last couple of years. Next slide. Okay, so my name is Isabelle Allen. I live in Kennebec, Ontario. I'm a member of Timiskaming First Nation, and this is my dog, Juniper. I also am the project forester for Wakatone Development, who, if you haven't heard of them, we're owned by 3 First Nations and operating in the Northeast Superior region of Ontario with a focus on forest management services and increasing capacity and engagement of Indigenous communities, in that area. We incorporated in 2016, and I've been working on the HAP program for about 2.5 years now. So to quickly go over what I will be talking about today, I'll give a brief overview of HAP and why we're doing a focus on boots on the ground. We'll go over the field tours that have occurred, how the competition index surveys work, the brushing research plots that were completed this summer, and guardianship and how that ties into the HAP program. So to kind of reiterate what Nelson was saying, the HAP program arose from an advocacy of First Nation communities bringing their concerns about herbicides to, well, at the time it was Tembec, but it's now RIAM. And RIAM recognized that their source 100% of their raw materials are coming from land that they do not own. And they desired to reach an agreement with Indigenous communities that aligned with free, prior, and informed consent, or the FPIC guidelines, in order to retain relationships. Because the goal of the forest industry is to develop and regenerate forests in the best way possible. That includes like scientific, economic, and socially responsible practices. So in order to be socially responsible, there had to be some sort of feedback to all of these concerns that were coming from local communities, especially Indigenous communities, around the use of herbicide. So as a result of all this, HAP started in 2007, and it resulted in a 75% reduction in active ingredient, that's measured in kilograms, being applied to the Chapleau Crown Game Preserve between 2007 and 2017, so the first 10 years. So after that initial success, there continued to be a shared desire to move towards a more on-the-ground activity to create a HAP toolkit that would support forest managers and silvicultural personnel. Wakatone joined the HAP initiative in 2016, and we now engage with NRCan, OFRI, MNRF, and all these science personnel to advance the program. And the foundational principle of HAP 2.0 is engagement with Indigenous people and to encourage connections among Indigenous knowledge, ecological research, and advanced technology. So that's, you know, there's been a continued desire to get the manager or people that are managing these resources out on the ground to see how they work in real life, to understand the resource by getting their boots on the ground. Also for, just a little context, I don't think there's any words in this slideshow, but these are all photos that were taken in Chapleau area. So one of the first boots on the ground initiatives that we did was field tours. We had called them HAP gatherings, or the first one that occurred in October of 2018 was the Enhanced Forest Productivity Workshop. And the goal of the workshop was to encourage discussion around the topic of regeneration method and alternatives to the use of chemical spray. So this was accomplished, the discussion over the course of the workshop, and we identified the next steps, which were to continue long-term research exploring methods of improving regeneration, such as planting larger seedlings, different ground pressures of disc trenching, cut to length versus full tree harvesting, using ash or other fertilizers, mechanical brushing techniques, and also to look into new technologies that use soil characteristics to map forest units with more ecosystem-based approach, to continue to engage local communities within their areas of interest for input on blocks before they are harvested, as well as sourcing them as a potential workforce for mechanical brushing. And there was a general agreement among participants that we would meet again in the near future to discuss what we talked about and continue to develop an action plan. So this second meeting occurred between August 26th and 28th, 2019. As you can see from these photos, it's a much warmer time to have a field tour. And at this workshop, we again promoted discussion to look into different herbicide alternative strategies. And some ideas brought up over the course of the 2 days were the usefulness of identifying sites that will not require treatment prior to harvest, the need for mechanical brush saws without harmful emissions, the intensity of site preparation, increasing public awareness and understanding, and the implications of climate change. So at the end of this workshop, we had started to develop an action plan that would allow further collaboration to reach the goals of HAP. I believe that next field tour had been scheduled sometime in March of 2020, but we all know what happened there. So I'm looking forward to next year's field tour. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the competition index surveys that are run by RIAM. So competition indices are a comprehensive method for combining descriptions of both crop and non-crop vegetation to produce a value with, which indicates the relative effect of non-crop vegetation on crop species. So basically that's measuring a planted seedling and how well it's doing relative to the competing species that are growing around it. So these surveys are completed by RIAM summer staff and Wakatoan field staff before herbicide application, and they're used as a tool to help net down RIAM's spray program. So the methodology of these surveys is step one, find a crop tree. So find a planted tree from last year. And then you're going to measure the height of that tree to the nearest 10 centimeters and record the species and location. Next, you're going to measure a 1.1 meter radius from the crop tree and record all other vegetation that's occurring within that plot. Some popular examples were blueberries, aspen, pin cherry, and alder. And then for each species that's recorded within that 1.1 meter plot, we would record the average height and the percent coverage that that species had within the plot. So all of this data is recorded and compiled within the rugby unit, which I don't know if you can see my mouse, but it's this little handheld device out in the field. And that would spit out a competition index value for each plot or for each planted seedling. So this photo, you can see Amberly and myself completing a competition index survey on this little seedling. And then the photo on the right is a view from a previous year's plot center. We've been doing this for, I think, 3 years now. But as you can imagine, there's a pretty wide variety of competition that seedlings are facing after they've been planted. So this photo on the far left, you can barely see this little pine tree that's planted at the bottom here. I'm pretty tall. I'm probably about 5'10" with this hard hat on. So this competing poplar is at least 6 feet tall. So something like this would generate a really high competition index value, especially when you compare it to something like this photo on the right, where you can see Dakota, who is also very tall, towering above all of this vegetation. It looks like there's a lot of lab tea, but this isn't something that's going to outcompete those planted seedlings. And this is not an area that is going to need help to have those seedlings grow and be healthy trees in the future. So that would have a really low competition index. And the photo in the center is just another reference photo of a planted seedling and the variety of competition or competing vegetation species that can come up after the year after it's been planted. So all of the data that's recorded within those rugby units is uploaded onto RIAM servers and used to create maps like this, with each dot representing a plot center. So a competition index of 60 or above is considered to be high and something that would require some sort of assistance, either herbicide or other, in order to reach its full potential growing as a tree. The green dots are a really low value, so it's 0 to 20, which would be fine to grow on their own and wouldn't require any sort of additional help. And then the yellow and orange dots are somewhere in the middle that maybe we could look over again before deciding. So this is used as a tool as part of the net down process for RIAM. So they would use this information when they're doing their flights over top of blocks to decide what areas to spray and not spray. So for example, this map is from this year's surveys that were done within the game preserve. And all of these green areas could be dropped. So that orange outline is potential spray. And those blocks would be, or those sub blocks would be dropped from the spray program. And just to give it a bit of context, this year, the area within the Chapleau Crown Game Preserve was netted down by 45% from the original area that was allotted to be sprayed due to their flights and competition index survey results. And then another photo from a plot center of the beautiful Chapleau area. The next thing that I will talk about is the brushing research plots, which the Wakatoan field staff that you can see here, the 5 of us looking like an album cover. We established a simple yet meaningful silviculture experiment in the Chapleau area within the context of the HAP 2.0 collaboration. So this was co-developed between Natural Resource Canada, Wakatoan, and RIAM. And the objective of this study was to evaluate the ability of the competition index used by RIAM to predict planted seedling responses in height and diameter growth to release, or brushing in this case. You can see the brush saw that David is holding, over a gradient of site conditions. So the methodology for these plots was that we would select sites that were recently planted. So all the sites that we did were planted 1 year ago with either spruce or pine seedlings, and they're all located close to the Chapleau area with a relatively easy access, so that we could visit these sites again easily in the future to compare the growth, and it'd be easy to do site visits for future field tours. So once we found a site, we would put down our plot center, which is this orange egg in the front here, and measure out a 6-meter radius around the plot center. That's an area of about 113 meters squared. So within that plot, we would then tag all of the planted seedlings. Ideally, there would have been around 20 seedlings in each plot, but we tagged 10 of them for the purpose of the survey. And for each tagged seedling. You can see Dakota here is measuring the height of the seedling as well as using the caliper to measure the root collar diameter of the seedling and recording it in the notebook. And then we have Amberly in the back who is doing a vegetation index survey, like the ones, exactly the ones for RIAM, for each seedling within the plots. There would be 10 vegetation index plots within each of these brushing research plots. You can see here tagging a seedling here. So each seedling had a unique number identifier so that we'd be able to go back to that exact seedling in the future. And once we had measured all of the seedlings within the plot, we would move so that we create a second plot that was 5 meters away from the first plot and do the exact same procedure over again. So we have a pair of plots. One of them would be left as is for the control. And the second one, after we had done all of our measuring, we would do a treatment of brushing to it, where we brushed all of the competing vegetation down pretty much as low to the ground level as we could possibly get. So on the left here is a photo of a plot that has been brushed down. You can see the pink tags of all of the seedlings that we had measured within that plot. And then you can also see JC working hard on the right over here using that brush saw. By the end of the 2 weeks that we had worked on this project, we had done 30 paired plots, so 60 plots in total that we'll be able to go back and measure again in the future. And we had measured just over, I believe, 540 individual seedlings and created a database that we are now sharing with NRCan and RIAM so that we can develop a report and continue this research over time. I think that's all I wanted to say about that. So the last thing that I will touch on is the Guardians program that we're doing at Wakatoa and how that fits in with the guiding principles of HAP as well. So our elders envisioned a program that strengthened our youth and connecting them to the land, culture, and language by building relations to the homelands and original ways of knowing in a land-based learning program. We're looking at doing skill building, certifications, job and education ready experience within forestry and the forest stewardship realm. So this is our level A logo of the turtle with the birch tree in it. Some of the projects that we're currently working on, I'll just go through these photos, and don't worry, all of these group shots were pre-COVID, so we weren't breaking any rules. This one here, we're doing a birch bark collection for our birch bark canoe and basket making that's coming up soon. You can also see in this bottom photo, JC with a lovely wreath of spruce roots that were harvested to use as kind of a binding or lashing in that process. We also have our birch syrup program. So this is our mobile birch shack. We usually park it non-COVID years in the Chapeau Crown Game Preserve. You can see the buckets down here on the birch trees. So this is like reinstating a traditional practice on the land and then inviting community members in the area to come in and help learn how to do this activity of collecting birch sap and then ultimately turning it into birch syrup, which you can see up here, something that we'll be selling, and then the proceeds of it will be going back into the Guardians program to keep these initiatives going to get youth on the land. We're also partnered with Outland, the Youth Employment Program. Oh yeah, we've been doing that for 2 years, 3 years now. And that's something where the youth are going out and JC, I'm sorry, I know it was different this year, but the aim of it is to get them experience in all kinds of natural resource like skills and experiences that will help them get jobs in that field, because we need more Indigenous voices in that arena of natural resources. It's a stewardship like point of view that we're looking for, or guardianship, you could say. So at Outland, they get training on how to use brush saws, chainsaws, how to do tree planting. They get fire safety. They'll do cultural activities as well. Like I know last year they built a drum. This year, I believe they helped build a sweat lodge on Bear Island. So that's these photos here. And then in the bottom right, we have our youth culture camp, which took place at Brunswick House First Nation last year, I believe, where we brought in teachings about the natural environment and how you can fit into that, just learning different ways of knowing. At the top here, you can see our lovely Guardians coordinator, Amberly Krakajizik, and the Land Needs Guardians logo, which is a national initiative going on to help unite different communities or First Nations, Indigenous communities that are doing these on the ground projects across the country, and building a toolkit to help empower these kinds of ideas. So HAP fits well into that boots on the ground mentality of our Guardians program, of having people on the ground to understand that resource better and to kind of move the yardstick on capacity and engagement in the forest sector. So miigwech, thank you for listening. Hopefully in the future, we will continue working with the Herbicide Alternatives Program and putting more boots on the ground. If you wanted to contact me about any of this content, my email is at the bottom of this slide. And I think now I will hand it back over to Isabelle Soulier for a question or discussion period.
That was great. Thank you.